Liberation podcast, coming to you from the Body Electric School. This is a podcast where we share and celebrate our erotic selves. This podcast, like the Body Electric School, is a safe space for discovery and transformation, titillation, pleasure, and liberation. And we have a very special, kind of extra special podcast this time where we're actually talking about one specific workshop that I'm actually going to be teaching and that we're developing. And it's called Healing the Sacred Erotic Connection. And this workshop is particularly designed for members of clergy, religious leaders, spiritual guides of all kinds, non-denominationally, but just, welcoming all people who identify in a role of a spiritual guide of some kind, and welcoming them into an experience of giving attention to and healing their own wounds and strengthening their own connection to their conception of divinity through the beautiful vehicle and tools that Body Electric offers. And I'm so happy to be here with two friends of mine who have very generously said yes to being a part of an advisory committee that we have gathered to help support the development of this workshop. And so we have John Carl Lewis and we have Dr. Kevin Jensen with us today. Hi, friends.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. And because I'm just going to be really transparent and honest, and because this is kind of a last minute podcast, I haven't done a lot of research on your prospective resumes. So I'm going to ask you two to introduce yourselves to our guests. Mm-hmm. John Carl, you want to start?
Sure. My name is John Carl Lewis. I have been a spiritual guide for several years. That some people call that spiritual direction. I've been doing some lecturing, going around, trying to help communities of faith have reasonable, healthy, liberating conversations about human sexuality. And now I'm moving more in the direction of helping people feel what it's like to be in their erotic bodies at the same time they're connecting with the spiritual. So That's me. No titles. That's just me.
Thank you and welcome.
Mm-hmm.
How about you, Kevin?
And I do have a title. I have a doctor at the front of my name, and that's a doctor of education, which means I love to go deep and do the kinds of research that you need to actually break through paradigms that keep people trapped in old ways of thinking that may or may not be helpful for them. And so my role is that of a Bible scholar, linking biblical ethics with these questions of sex education, helping people begin to take that shift in thinking from ambiguity to clarity on what God might have to contribute to the experience of sexuality. So for those people who are still asking the question, is it even okay to be here? I'm scared of words like pleasure. This has been my own journey with the scripture to unpack what are the meanings the authors are communicating. And we were talking just before we got on the podcast. I wrote my whole story of how I navigated that process in a book called Sacred Not Sinful, A New Christian Sexual Ethic. So that gives you some idea of the background I'm bringing into this conversation.
Wow. It's just like, how do we make the esoteric really practical?
Yes.
It becomes one own lived experience. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for being here. And I just want to kind of jump in with this question. I guess under the umbrella of like Dr. Heal Thyself, why is it important for people who are guides of others, spiritual guides of others in all its capacities, to be curious about giving attention to their own healing around the erotic?
Well, I've found in my circles of friends, many of whom are clergy in Christian churches, worship leaders, other spiritual guides and people in spiritual traditions outside of Christianity, the thing they never teach you in your training is how to take care of yourself, period. And there tends to be a cone of silence around acknowledging that the erotic is something that each of us has deep within ourselves. It's a part connected to our spirit and our emotions and our brain. It's there. And so I've had friends who have been thrown out of their churches, and or have chosen to amputate parts of their lives, parts of the things that might give them joy and pleasure, in order to fit into this box that institutions put them in.
Yeah, I will build on that by going even beyond the minister to the people that we serve, because one of the reasons why I'm in this work is because I think that sexuality is the number one obstacle for my generation, the millennial generation, from being connected with the Christian faith, with the Christian community. And if we're going to actually provide pathways for this group of people, for those who feel alienated from Christianity because of something to do with sexuality, if we're going to make a pathway for them back into community, we have to navigate that ourselves first. And that's why I'm so excited about what we're doing here.
And just to be clear, this I mean, while John Carl and Kevin themselves come from a Christian perspective in their lives, and that's the meaning, that they find in their divinity. This workshop is for all people, rabbis, all religions, even Buddhists, whomever who are spiritual guides. We just really want to name that as well. It makes sense, I guess, when we look at the history of religion, and certainly like the Catholic Church and other sort of Christian church, and really all religions, that for some reason over the history of time, there's not been a lot of trust in that the powers that be have about supporting people and being connected to their own erotic power. And in fact, it seems like religions over time have tried to squash it and to control it and to cultivate environments of fear, or just like you said, having people amputate or compartmentalize those parts of themselves. And I think it's not hard to see the impact that's had on the world. Violence, power dynamics that are unhealthy in so many ways. And I'm just curious, from kind of like a broader historical perspective of religion and culture, what comes up for you when you think about this?
Well, this is very fresh for me. I've just been reading about eroticism in texts from spiritual traditions around the world. Interesting, an ambiguity in Buddhism that's not an outright ban. Of course, the shamans in many Native American cultures, I know the Diné, the Navajo, the best, was always someone born with what we think of the equipment as a man, who had sex with the warriors, who were usually, but not always, also men. And in my own life, I've had to come to a realization that the institutions which call themselves the holders of the faith have an agenda of staying in power. And as I find myself saying to people, if you are erotically fulfilled, if your heart is leading you into connection with yourself and all humanity, it is very, very hard for someone to convince you you're bad. so that you can support their power structure. And I'm not just talking about religious institutions either. Our capitalist economy is built on the notion that we must make people crave what they don't have. Even when they have something, they need to crave more. And each of us has a body, and each of us can create pleasure for ourselves, joy for ourselves. And if we're doing that, we don't buy very many things. And so capitalism has echoed the message of the institutional church in a way that people who aren't explicitly Christian have sucked up all this sex negativity, because then they buy things to make themselves feel better.
Yes. I can speak from a historically Christian standpoint. From the earliest Christian literature we have, even some of the writings in the New Testament are already confronting this idea that entering the kingdom of God, or this spiritual heavenly state, requires an abandonment of the body. And you actually have a couple letters in the New Testament that are written to address this as being a problem. And the reason for this, I think, is fascinating. And again, I'm speaking for the Christian tradition explicitly with this idea that Jesus came in a human body. But it is not just Christianity. It is so many of the traditions that have rejected the body as part of the experience of God, and said, in order to experience God, we need to leave the body. We need to, perhaps even for the modernist person who doesn't really identify with religion, but identifies with something like science as being a way of discovering truth, we still have the Enlightenment teachings, which say that truth exists out there, not in here. And so the body, whether it's from science or from religion or from economics, as John Carl was saying, has been left out. And as long as we are disconnected from a part of ourselves, I think we are still disconnected from a part of God.
Right. I mean, what's that book? The Kingdom of Heaven is Within? The Kingdom of God is Within? Who wrote that book?
That's in Gospel of Thomas.
I can't remember. Anyway,
Yep.
yeah, it's interesting because, Body Electric kind of like flips the switch on that, flips the script. This idea, this invitation to descend from mind into heart, into belly, into groin, into our eros, to that this body that we live in, that we walk in the world, is a temple. It's a temple for the divine. That it can be experienced that way. And that if we work or give attention to tapping and raising and spreading this power, this life force, orgasmic, divine power, sacred power that lives within us, let it be flowing, let it be powerfully activated and flowing in our lives, and kind of figure out how to live life from that place. Right? That we're that we become the most alive we can be, the most joyful, the most grateful, the most in alignment and of service to the people in our lives and the world that we share. So in some ways, I think this invitation for Body Electric in this workshop itself is kind of like, can people who feel the call to serve others spiritually take the risk of turning that care towards themselves, giving themselves the attention that I think people in service to others can so easily or beautifully give others? And that can be so hard, right? Why is it so hard? What programming do we live with? The training we've been given from culture, I don't even know what it is, but why can it be so hard when we have the capacity and desire to serve others so beautifully and powerfully, to turn that attention towards our own care?
Well, I mean, some of it is, like you're saying, those of us who are called to serve others in whatever capacity, even, nurses, and death doulas. Um,
Yeah.
there is so much pain and need in the world. I know sometimes for me it feels selfish to look away from the pain of the world and taking time for me to heal. Um, I had a powerful example of this. I went away to a 6-day training with founder of Body Electric, Joseph Kramer, and really got in touch with who I was as an erotic being, to the sense that when I came out of that workshop, I was a radically different person. And then I led some workshops, and I have never had responses to my workshops like that. Evidently, there was something pouring out of me that I didn't know was possible to pour out of me. So, in a way, being in touch with Eros or rest or bubble baths or anything like that, anytime you take away for yourself intentionally, is going to make you a better conduit for the divine forces to make positive change in other people's lives. I'm pretty convinced of that now.
Attach the face mask to oneself before applying to others.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One of the risky things, though, is, again, I try not to be too harsh on the institutional church, but the institutional church has never known what to do with people who are tapping into the mysticism of the erotic. In Europe, they tended to burn them. And, even now, I know of progressive congregations that have, thrown out pastors who were living a sexual ethic that they thought they were teaching to the congregation, which was healthy. And so there's a risk, which we've talked about. A lot of this work has to be done in private. We can't talk about this work we're doing on ourselves. So it makes it very risky to come to a group of people who you don't know and open yourself in a way that if the folks back in your congregation knew, or your spouse at home knew, quite frankly, you're opening up, you would significantly lose trust in even your position.
Can I talk about that for a moment? I'm thinking right now about the philosophical root of this issue. Is this false dichotomy that I encounter with a lot of Christians, and is partly because of our detachment from the body. Many of us have never learned how to experience the body in a way that is healthy, that is whole, and that is life-giving. So when you say, I'm going to take some time away to encounter the erotic, the synonym in somebody's mind is the reckless, the selfish, the self-indulgent, this is destructive pathway. How can you as a Christian leader be going this way? And this is why I think it's so important that we have the language to frame our understanding of the erotic, not as how many assume it might be because of ignorance, but with the capacity of what it could be as a rediscovery and a reintegration of wholeness, this experience of union, of the divine mystery of God and humanity taking place through our encounter with one another. And if we are able to then raise up the erotic on this side and offer a vision for what it can be, you now give people a path to move toward instead of just something over here to be afraid of.
Yes.
So redeeming this language, I think, is really important.
Well, one of the things I love about Body Electric and why I love that Body Electric is offering this is the school offers practices which are demonstrated and facilitated by very, very good teachers who know how to get people in touch with themselves first and then with others in a healthy way. The teachings around consent, the teachings around boundaries. A person who has learned these things, which you do not learn in seminary, yes, we're learning them in my seminary, but the boundaries and the consent language that they help you develop lets you enjoy your own beautiful eroticism without needing to transgress the boundaries of the people you're serving, which happens way too often.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and I think, it's something in my journey in Body Electric, and I think people conflate a lot is sex and eros, which is different, I think, we talk about activating, welcoming, spreading our orgasmic life force energy of that moves through our body and inspires pleasure. Pleasure, tantric principle, pleasure is healing. And when people don't know Body Electric, they oftentimes the mind just kind of simply goes to sex and the act of sex, or sex with oneself, or sex with other people. When really it's like what we're talking about, it's like Jean Houston in her wonderful book, The Search for the Beloved, talks about eros is the lure of muchness.
Yes.
Right? It's where things become spiced and evoked, activated, right? And that erotic energy itself is just this umbrella that we activate that informs our creativity, our spirituality, our bodies, our relationships, our work, all parts of us, right? And that sex is a part of that. So I think part of it is, yes, it's kind of like there's the focus on sex and the focus on, the history and the trauma and the betrayal around transgressions around sex in so many ways. But for me, this experience, what we're talking about, is less about sex and more about eros. And so it's possible, for example, that people could come to this experience who are celibate, who don't have sex with other people as some sort of spiritual practice, and still get in touch with their own connection to eros. And I'm just going to say this for me. This is just how I see things. This is not a capital T truth. But I believe my eros is God. That's what I believe. Like, whatever God is, the love energy of the universe, the words that we have for it. I believe that love energy is what animates me, my body, and wants to flow through me. And if God has a consciousness, God is moving through all of us in this way that desires to know itself, and that my very erotic energy that lives within is sacred, is my divinity, and I can dance with it in a way that's very limited and compartmentalized and compressed, or I could, get really curious about it, bring it forth and dance with it and see where it takes me.
Well, I think that's interesting. I sometimes think that I know Christians think of the erotic as a false god that's going to lead them away from the true God. But the more in touch I get with the God of my understanding, which looks nothing like I was handed in Sunday school, by the way, the more I get in touch with even the Christ in the Gospels, the Jesus in the Gospels, I find I am encountering what Richard Rohr calls the Christ consciousness, which is merely a name for a force, a being, a power, an intelligence that is out there that I happen to call Christ. That is the true animator and motivator and liberator of all things. And that Christ consciousness acts a lot like erotic energy if you learn how to cultivate it and understand it in ways that are healing and healthy. And not talking about it and not thinking about it are not healing, nor are they healthy.
I have a fear that comes up for me around this part of the conversation. And I know we talked about this somewhat in our planning discussion, which I'm grateful for. But as I was on my own healing journey here, one of the things that I was afraid of was that simply by opening myself up to the erotic, I had no idea what to expect.
Yes.
And I'm going to share a quote from a tantric philosopher at this point, because Tantra is the one religious tradition I'm aware of that did not reject the body, but deeply integrated it as part of the spiritual practice.
Yes.
And this philosopher has a quote that says, sex, I'm paraphrasing, but sex can either be the biggest distraction from God or the most powerful way to experience God. And both of those things, I think, also exist in the erotic, that isolated from everything else, perhaps, or perhaps approached with ignorance and without guidance, you end up getting lost somewhere along the way, as opposed to having this amplify and heighten your ability to experience God.
Yeah.
And that was something that scared me at the beginning, because I had nobody else on this journey to help me process that.
Yeah. And that's so important too, like, just having community of people who are also on that journey and supporting you in yours. And it can feel so alone, right? It can feel so taboo in ways that aren't useful. Yeah. When I teach Body Electric, there's always this, at the beginning weekend, there's always this conversation about where did we learn about sex and what did we learn, right? And I always start the conversation sort of cheekily and with humor. I say, so perhaps like me, when you were coming into your pubescence at whatever, 12, 13, 14, the elders from your village brought you to the temple of Eros to initiate you and to teach you all about your body and your pleasure and who you are as an erotic being and all the ancient wisdom texts that would support you in flowering as an erotic being in the world, right? Yes. And literally no one has ever had that experience, you know what I mean? And maybe someone has, and it just continually astounds me about how terrible humans are across the board in supporting the healthy and skillful and wise development of this crucial part of us. You know what I mean? It's wild. You know what I mean? How badly we do it. And again, I think this is another source of when we look at the world and a lot of the very real issues we have around lots of things. I believe that informs it. And so, this invitation again to, with Body Electric and some of the language I use about Body Electric is it's kind of like the sort of intentional, conscious, experiential, erotic education that none of us ever had.
Right.
And in that way, it's so valuable. Right?
Well, one of the reasons I'm glad Body Electric is offering this is because it has allowed me it's given me permission to have conversations with people, not just spiritual leaders, around how that this is even available. Body Electric is teaching practices that have been perfected over the course of 40 years. It works.
Yeah,
these are people who understand how sex, the body, the emotions, the spiritual, the erotic work. And even to let someone know in, let me say specifically Christian bubbles, that these professionals are available to help you develop into a better version of yourself and be more available to serve in whatever way you serve the world. When they find out this exists, they first don't believe it, and then they're very intrigued.
Yeah.
And so I'm glad that this is an excuse to let more people know that skilled, professional, time-tested help is available with this, for this.
There is a pathway back to that reconnection with yourself.
Yes.
And you don't have to try to figure it out on your own.
Right.
Yes. Yeah, and I appreciate, and again, this isn't an advertisement for Bioelectric or whatever, but some things I appreciate about Bioelectric, it's we welcome and have always honored one's own experience of the sacred, whatever that is, and we acknowledge the sacredness of our erotic body and our erotic journey. And another thing I love about Body Electric is that the people who facilitate these experiences, the thing that is utmost in their minds is the care for the participants and the care for the people who are walking through the experience, because we know how tender this is, how vulnerable it can be, what it can bring up in people, and the capacity to kind of create a container that you can trust the bones of the container. That the container, when everybody's there and they're holding these norms and agreements with such sacred care, that space can hold the enormity of an individual person's wounds or experience.
Yet.
Together, that we together have the capacity to hold that. And whomever you are and whatever you're walking in with and whatever your experience or wounding or joys or connection has been.
And this is part of what I'm passionate about in opening this space for people, is that all of those experiences are there, whether you talk about them or not.
Yes.
All of those feelings, all of that energy is present, whether you know how to relate to it in a healthy way or not. And the easiest choice for most of us, because we don't have opportunities like this every day, and because we're oftentimes in communities where people aren't even aware that this could be a good, positive, healthy direction, because we don't have the chance to learn this, it's often repressed. And this is why we have so many people in evangelical circles these days. Suddenly they're in the press because they did something totally opposite what they say they intended to do. And that is because their moral framework was detached from the body. They were never able to bring their whole self into, hey, let us cultivate a healthy sexual expression. It was, let us repress sexuality, and at some point, it will come forth and demand to be dealt with.
Yes, it will.
I will argue, I'm basically making a case right now that Christian leaders need to go to a space, whether it's this space or some other space, where we can open that up, where people are going to hold it and say, we welcome you. We're so proud of you for opening this up, for saying, yes, I have this. And let's figure out how we can work together to become better leaders, more integrated, whole people that can then guide those who are still scared, still have no freaking clue what this is about, so we can help them to also do that. But I think we have to do that first in order to be the example, in order to open the door.
Mm-hmm. And
Absolutely.
that's why we decided to have this first experience really be for those leaders, Yeah, go ahead, John Carl. Right.
Well, and also, we've touched upon the risk, the fears, but what excites me about this upcoming experience is that space will be made to name those fears, to name that risk, so that you can get that out in front of a supportive group of people. The men who come to this will be interviewed. This will be a good, nurturing group of people to share all your fears with and keep your secrets.
Yeah.
And we will explicitly give space to help people maybe set those down for a moment so that they can look at things in a fresh way. Maybe take a breath away from those fears and do a what if. You know, you're not compelled to do anything. So maybe even just coming and sitting in that environment will be a healing thing.
Yeah, and that's important, that everything's a choice. No one's required to participate in anything. We have lots of, ways to step aside for a second, to settle and to kind of just titrate your nervous system and check in with yourself about am I available for this next activity or for this experience or not, with no shame or pressure. It's really important that people know that have that agency in this experience. And I think I just want to reiterate what you just said, John Carl, that if someone's journey at this experience is to come and just be in the group, and that's what they're available for, without even participating in whatever activities we're doing, gorgeous, profound.
I will offer two things from an educational perspective that I appreciate about the approach here. The first is that you've invited so many voices to speak into this and contribute to shaping an experience that's going to be accessible for a lot of people. And then secondly, that one of the features here is of integrating you, your personal experience, your walk with the divine in the experience. I know of a number of various groups that will say, hey, you can give up your whole religious tradition. It's silly. You should just be able to have fun and enjoy your sexuality.
Right.
And this creates such a cognitive disconnect that makes it really hard to actually integrate. And so having you talk about these spaces for integration, the welcoming of where somebody is at, is something I think is so valuable for this educational process.
Beautiful. Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting, all of it, just for people who are in these various roles, just to check in with that feeling inside of resonating with that archetype of spiritual guide or priest or clergy or rabbi, one who serves in this way in the context of religion or spirituality, and I didn't grow up going to church. My family's Irish Catholic, and I'm the youngest of 8 kids, but we, by the time they got to me, they weren't going to church. And it was so interesting, even with that, when I was 8 or 9 years old, people would ask me what I want to be when I grow up, and I would say I want to be a priest. And I really didn't know why, because I didn't know any priests. I didn't have any in my life, but for some reason that was the answer. And I don't know why, but that knowing inside or something, and I didn't go that path because of, being gay, or I wasn't a part of the church. But in some ways, the guide of the body electric teacher is in some ways like an inviter towards all of this, similar to a guide, a spiritual guide, I guess, although it's not particularly spiritual, though it is sacred. But I remember when I was a cute little chipster in my late 20s, living in New York City, I got called to go to a commercial, to try to be in a commercial and audition, and the agent was like, "Go to Don K's casting dressed as a priest." Click, and I was like, "Okay," so I just wore all black and I buttoned up my thing, and I got a little piece of white cardboard and put it here. And I walked into this casting room of like 60 men, all who look exactly like me, all dressed as priests. And I somehow booked that commercial, and it was for the then Connie Chung show, which was a short-lived news show on TV, on CNN. And I went to this audition, and they put me in this whole priest regalia, black robes, the whole caboodle. You know, and I had never been in anything like that before. And so I didn't even know what I looked like. And then after they put me in this and I turned around and I saw myself in the mirror, I was like, oh my God. It's like I saw myself. Something was just like, this could have been my path, you know? And I'm just kind of speaking this in terms of kind of like the beauty and power of those who feel the activation and the resonance of someone who's called to serve in this way. And how powerful
amazing.
I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
And just how beautiful and powerful it is to, you know, to imagine like, wow, what if a part of this archetype I'm resonating with within was intentionally supported with my own connection to Eros?
Well, what I find interesting is having been taught by you, I'm not sure that you're not a priest. It is not possible to wrestle with the sacred as your full-time job was for years and years and years in a mindful and intentional way, and not channel the divine healing power for other people. And I found it interesting in my training, the 6-day training with Joseph Kramer, that throughout that God was telling me things that I could not have received if my body had not been open, relaxed, attentive, listening. And God gave me a very clear picture of what my small p priesthood is going to look like in the world. So what is going to happen for someone who is actually on that path? What's God going to tell you? What ministry are you going to spin off because you now understand this huge piece of humanity better because you understand yourself?
Yeah. What will be awakened?
Yeah, what's going to wake up?
I'm feeling in my body right now this tension perhaps somebody may experience comes into this question of what is here for me. And if you're like me, your whole life is defined by the book, by the theology, by the principles. And for me, I had to go through the book to find the truth that was waiting for me.
Same here.
And I would encourage you to actually look more deeply into your scriptures, whatever those might be. Because what I found as I started to ask the question, I said, there is a disconnect inside of me. I know there's a piece of my body that is divine, that is holy. There's something sacred here. But everything I've heard about this text says, don't go there. And I had to resolve that first. And the way I resolved it was not by ignoring it, but by going deeply into it. And I would say that if you find yourself in that place where you're like, oh, I do wonder what this would be like, what's here, like these stories of these men you've heard already, I would encourage you to keep that tension between these two feelings and do what you need to honor yourself and where you're at in your experience. Like even take what we've already talked about of this body erotic experience where we honor exactly where you're at, honor what you're ready for. But don't be stuck in indecision. Like actually go look and find out if the answer for you is yes or no. And I think the deeper you go, like the more understanding you're going to have, the more courage you're going to have, that when you finally know you're ready to take this next step, like all of you is going to be ready instead of some part of you staying behind wondering if maybe this is the end of your relationship with God. Yeah. I would encourage you, don't give that up because you don't have to. but take the time that you need. Get the connection, the resources you need to process this, because they're available. Like people like John Carl, people like me, even talk with somebody like Craig who's had these conversations with people before. And don't just hide it, because again, we're not about repression. We're about opening all of this up and integrating it. And I think this is this beautiful dance of the erotic.
And quite literally, an exploration of faith.
Yes. It takes faith. It's going to take faith to it's going to take faith to have the page up on your browser.
Yeah.
It's going to take faith to look at the blurb. I used to be afraid of the Body Electric website.
Yeah. And there's something beautiful and useful about the fear.
Yeah.
The practice of walking through a doorway that we fear, because there's some part of us inside that says, I know there's something there for me.
Yes.
Wow, so cool. So the workshop is Healing the Sacred Erotic Connection. And this iteration of it is going to be happening in just outside of Kansas City, Missouri, from Tuesday, November 19th to Friday, November 22nd. We did that intentionally to have it be during the week so that people could get home to their congregations and, communities on the weekend. It's all the information for the workshop is on the Body Electric website, www.bodyelectric.org. And in the show notes, there'll be information about myself and is it okay if we include your information, John Carl?
Oh, please include my information. And if anybody wants to talk about this, even if you don't intend on going, that's what I do. I love to hear you talk about this for you.
Yeah, cool. And so, contact information will be available if, because it is important to have those conversations. Jump on Zoom, check in about this. It's beautiful. Kevin?
And I'll share a link to my book with you as well, if you want to drop that in there, just because it can walk you through the story and just get some more like a look at somebody in process. Because what I'm here talking because I believe in this, because I've been here, I've been through this process.
And the book is Sacred Not Sinful by Dr. Kevin Jensen. Cool. Last thoughts now? What else is important to say before we close this scintillating conversation?
I know I asked at one point in the planning, this will be a lot for people to process in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe Body Electric makes space for people to sort of step aside and maybe get some tending. So if and when you do freak out, we gotcha.
Absolutely.
We know somebody's going to freak out. It's going to be too much. And we make space for that.
I'm kind of curious, just you probably have this on the website right now, but for those who come and find this really transformative, is there a community that they can then connect with for an ongoing journey and like navigating this? How do I bring this back home now? What do I do?
We always have at least a follow-up gathering on Zoom in terms of integration and support. And many times there's groups who go through an intensive with Body Electric or a workshop who choose to continue to stay connected. So for example, last summer we did Dear Love of Comrades, which is a beautiful week-long experience that I got to teach with Don Shine, who's a Body Electric teacher. And they started this beautiful monthly kind of queer book club. And that's how they're staying connected. And anybody, and they've expanded it out to anybody who's done Dear Love of Comrades, that workshop. So that's a way that they're doing it. I mean, I think that there's the possibility of a community developing here. And I think it should. I think it's a great idea. Yeah, that's a good point.
That's really cool. I have one closing thought, which would be Jesus taught the first and greatest commandment to love God with all your heart and to love your neighbor as yourself. And this whole idea of we love God with every single part of who we are, heart, soul, mind, and strength. And this also flows into how we love our neighbor. But Jesus taught a new commandment. He taught a variation on this. He said, a new commandment I'm giving you, that you love one another as I have loved you. Not just as you know how to love already, but as God loves you. And for me, the deeper I've been able to experience this integration of the erotic, of the spiritual, of the connection to the body, the more I have understood the love of God, and it has changed how I love other people.
That's beautiful. And I also want to say that you may not want to hear this, but it actually could be very fun. It's going to be fun. It's going to be joyful. There's going to be dance. And I think there's something, there's something about the struggle. There's something about the wounds. There's something about the fear. But there's also something about the celebration of our love of our divinity and our love of this absolute beautiful mystery we're walking on our planet. I mean, it's amazing. And so, there's going to be space for all of that. And if you're hearing this and there's something inside of you that activates, that says there's something for me here, please join us. And in many ways, this workshop is just a beginning of what I hope will be a lot of really beautiful, meaningful programming over time that will support people in their own liberation. Is really what we're talking about, and their connection to the divine as they define it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I love that you've created this space. Love that we get to join you in this conversation as well. Thank you for this.
Thank you. Thank you, John Carl Lewis. Thank you, Dr. Kevin Jensen. And thank you, everyone out there who's listening. And, go love the world.
Love it.